Okay, thank you, David. Right, so I start, okay? I'm very grateful, very kind. And thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Because the English were very lazy and we're very bad with languages. So it's fantastic that you are so kind to me. Okay, so I thought I should start by just giving you a little bit of background about me so you know where I'm coming from. So to start with, my undergraduate degree was in film many years ago. I then did philosophy, I then taught, I then became an educational filmmaker, then I went into an educational charity, and then by this strange route I ended up going and doing my PhD in education, but education, learning and technology. So it's bringing those combinations together. So, at the moment, it says I'm at the Open University. Previously, I was with UCL, and before that, University of Bristol. And so, my work has very much been involved in working with people, teaching about education, about learning, about technology, and I see myself as a learning scientist who has an interest in innovation. So the thing that I'm really very, very passionate about, and what gets me up in the morning, is to understand and enhance learning. And when people talk about learning, particularly in the education and technology areas, is that they don't, in my opinion, think of everything that's necessary. So for me, it's really important to start with that we do think about the learning sciences, we do think about the psychology, we do try and understand how it is that people learn. But that's just one of the steps, one of the schools. And the other thing is the learning technologies, which in our instance it can be use of AI, but lots of other technologies that are also possible. Now, in my experience, many of the people who are involved in education and technology, that's what they think of as those two legs. But the reality is it's absolutely fundamental to also think about educational practice. So we can build the best tool in the world that is grounded in fantastic psychology. The tool itself has brilliant computer science, engineering in there, but then the tool sits on a shelf because people haven't thought about how this might actually happen in practice, in real classrooms. And this disconnect I see all the time. Okay, so I wanted to start with this because most of my talks are not to experienced people such as yourself, computer scientists. Mostly I talk about this presentation to educators or people who are introduced and becoming aware of these things for the very first time. But I quite like this and I wanted to share it with you because I think it's quite interesting. So, I usually ask this question. Okay, so I'm not going to ask you the question, but I'm going to ask you the question, what do you think most people are going to say in answer to that question?
Terminator.
Okay?
The Terminator.
Okay. Other people?
Robots. Robots thinking.
That's what, when people think of AI, they think of robots, right? For most people, AI equals robots. And whenever I've given this talk in China, the States, I've given this all around. And always, not when I'm in a group of computer scientists, but when I'm with ordinary people, people who are not involved in computer science, not involved in AI, 60% of the people, yeah, I said robots. Okay? For me, that's a worry, because robots are really interesting. My first postdoc was in a robotic research group. It's another story, but yeah, I have been there. But then I go on to say, well, look, what about all the other things? So, what about this? This is a form of AI, right? Without AI, this doesn't work. The self-driving cars. What about this? Winning at games. What about this? Actual games, right? Yeah, most computer games are stuffed full of AI. Using your phone, your Siri. The stock market. Lots of stocks are traded using AI, not people anymore. Weather forecasting. Right? So all these things you guys are familiar with, but most people don't really think of all of this stuff. They think for them, AI is still in the future. In the future, we will be experiencing AI. And I go through it and say, well, no. Have you been through passport control in an airport? Well, that's AI. What about this one? Everybody know what this one is? It's not 100% clear. Okay, this one is used, this is happening a lot in the States, where they're using AI to map where crime happens. So the red areas are the areas where there is lots of crime, where they predict crime will happen, and the green areas is where the blue areas are where they predict crime will not happen. So they send the police to the red areas.
That relies on reported crimes, right?
You mean data, right? Yeah. Absolutely it does. And data is a huge issue for us. And so I'm going to come back to that. But yes, it does. And it on reported crime, but it also on convictions and the addresses of the people who are convicted, and the temperature of the city at that time, what's happening in the social calendar, if there's a football match, so all this stuff, right? It's huge. It's huge. And talking about football, if you're into your sport, then AI is being used to plan our strategies, to plan how we do things. But of course, AI is being used in the medical field. We talked with your colleagues in the faculty of medicine last week, and AI is in a huge number of different ways of being used to help with diagnosis, to help with how people can monitor their health, how we can identify who's in need for help, how we can develop new drugs. So AI is everywhere there. I like this one. This is WeChat, which is big in China. And WeChat, they do everything on WeChat. They pay for their food on WeChat. They order their taxis on WeChat. They pay for their taxis on WeChat. They go to a restaurant. There's QR codes on the table. They WeChat the QR code. It's all done, and it's this extraordinary AI thing. And here's another example of AI, which I really like. If you have credit cards, have you ever been telephoned by the credit card company to say, we think that transaction was not a good transaction? Well, we know there's not somebody sat there looking at the transaction, right? It's AI. It's very powerful. That's a positive in finance. And what about this? If you want to borrow some money, when I got my first loan to buy my house, it was a man in an office, and I talked to him, and he made the decision. No more. It's all done by AI. What do you think this represents? Do you recognize? Yeah, so this is the woman who is the press officer for Donald Trump. So for me, this picture represents two things. It represents the creation of false news. Right? So there's lots of AI out there whose sole job is to create false news. But on the good side, there's other AI out there whose job is to identify the false news. Without this, I would not have survived in your lovely city of Marseille, because I use Google Translate everywhere. Right? Thank you for Google Translate. Of course it's AI. So the point is, AI is here. It's not something in the future. But a lot of the audiences I talk to, that then it is a future thing. It affects our lives in many different ways. But the point is that by the time it moves into practical things, we kind of forget. We don't call it AI anymore. So we call it all these different things. We call it Siri, or we call it passport control. But actually, underneath all that, as you guys are aware, there's a huge industry, a growing industry. That's why some of you are studying it, you have to join this industry, right? So it's just really quite impressive. But for me, and I know some of you guys, but all of you, this is where I'm particularly interested. So this is where we're using AI to support learning. So this was a tool that was developed by my colleagues at UCL in London when I was there. And we took that, as you can see, to China. And the logic here is that the tool is using AI to provide feedback, pathways, lots of different things. And this is just one possibility. So not only is AI everywhere, the reality is that AI is actually already in education in a lot of contexts. So for me, what's particularly interesting is helping us to understand them. And that's still the beginning. So if any of you know anything about education we have lots of theories. He is currently wearing a t-shirt, very kindly and helpfully, to name all the people whose learning theories we base it upon. But a lot of those theories are theoretical in the sense that we don't have a lot of huge evidence. Whereas now with AI, we're starting to unpack this, we're starting to open the black box of learning, and that for me is really exciting. But also it's being used to enhance learning in different ways, to help improve it, to give people individualized pathways, to give that feedback, to help when people are involved in large events, large learning cohorts, using for giving guidance on essays and a whole range of different things. So there are possibilities there as well. So this is the adaptation I mentioned. But also, one of the things that is particularly interesting to me is the way that we can use AI, not directly to students necessarily, but to use the AI to support teachers, to support students. And again, I know that's an area that Diego and Anderson are particularly interested in. So, that's kind of like the introduction that I was doing. And then I would move on to this. So I don't know if you've seen this cartoon before. It's quite old, as you can tell. But this is the vision, right? This is the vision. What we can do is we take a child into the classroom, they put on the hat with the wires, and they learn. Instant learning. Okay? This is the vision, but who knows? Okay. So, that was by way of my introduction. This is what I'm really going to focus on today. So I know that a lot of you involved as computer scientists, and some of you, I believe, are involved in AI in education. So some of this you'll understand, but I just want to give it a general overview. So I'm going to look at one particular way of doing AI in education, and then give some examples, some concrete examples of tools that are out there. I'm then going to talk very briefly about the promise of what's possible in the future, and then we're going to look more in depth at the perils. Because for me, the perils are kind of interesting and important. Okay, so one approach to AI in education. So one approach, they're referred to as intelligent tutoring systems. And these are the systems that are used most widely. And so the way they tend to work, they provide these step-by-step tutorials. So the student is given one piece of information, they do something, and when it's demonstrated they have learned it, they then give another piece of information, step by step by step. And they also tend to be in the well-structured subjects, like the physics or the mathematics or the chemistry, but not in the more challenging topics such as English or the arts, or creative subjects. But this step-by-step, the whole point is that the system works out what is going to be the most appropriate step for the individual student. And this is based on a huge range of data, particularly data about that individual student. What have they achieved in the past? What are their areas of challenge? What things have they demonstrated they do not understand? So we have that on the one hand, and then we have the bigger database of all other students who've gone through the system. And so the system pulls these together as best it can. So, the way in which these ITS work, and this is a typical arrangement, so this is not all of them, but it's very typical, is they work starting with models. So the first model is the model of the learner. So as I just described, what are the things that the student understands, what are their confusions, what's their achievements, and that is held together for that individual student, together with the model of all students who've gone through the system. The second model is the domain model. So this is the model of the information about the particular topic. So it's the mathematics. If the ITS is for mathematics, it's the mathematics. If the ITS is for physics, it's the physics. And the explanation of how that information sets together. then the third model is the pedagogy model. So this is about what is the best way for us to teach these students? What is the steps that we need to go through? So the system has these three models with all the information within these models, and then they are all pulled together to get these adaptive learning experiences. So you saw the picture of the children doing the fractions work. So with this, the system is determining what is appropriate for that student at that moment, depending on their experiences, their expectations, and so on and so forth. As they go through that, they generate more data. And so that data capture is a fundamental part, and then of course, the analysis of that data. The question is, what do we then do with that data analysis? Well, the first thing is typically we give feedback to the students. So as the students work through it, we will give them specific feedback to help them address their challenges, to help them move forward, whatever it might be. But at the same time, it determines what is the next step that we're going to put in front of the students, what is the next way forward. But it goes beyond there, because we also update the learner model. So we now know what the student has just done, so that's added into the model, so that we have that very clear understanding of where that student is. But equally, we can even learn stuff about the domain in terms, well actually, the students need to know this, they didn't know this, we need to add something into the domain model, or the pedagogy, well actually this method of A, B, C work better than D, E, F. So again, that's just adding and increasing that logic there. So as I say, this is one typical arrangement, right? It's not all of them and lots of different ways of doing it. But I think it's important to get your head around it because of the ways in which that implicates on future things, particularly around the ethics, etc. Okay, so I then said I was going to give you some examples. So some of these examples I expect some of you are already familiar with. So Carnegie Learning, have you heard of Carnegie Learning? Yeah? Not as many of you I thought. Okay, so Carnegie Learning came out of Carnegie Mellon University. It's been going for now at least 15 years. This tool uses AI for the learning of maths. The idea is that the system replicates what a human tutor might do. That's its ambition, that's what it intends to do. And using a particular methodological approach, it has studies that say it's a very effective system. Now, whether it is a very effective system is another question, but the study says it is. So, it uses a model of maths skills. It captures instructions all the time, and because they've got thousands and thousands of students who are using the system, it's constantly being able to improve itself. It rephrases questions, it directs students in different pathways, and it gives the feedback. So that's one system, and as I say, this system is a typical ITS. So it presents step by step by step. We present some information, the student engages with that information, we test the student on the information. When we're happy they have mastered it, we then repeat that process, step by step by step. The other system, the other approach is this. So have you heard of auto-tutor? No? Okay, we have one or two. Okay, so auto-tutor has also been developed over at least 15 years. And the difference is that whereas the ITS presents a fixed piece of information and then you engage with the task, with auto-tutor, it's a conversation. So in the early versions it was a typed conversation, in the later versions it was a spoken conversation. And what it does, it sets up the situation. Again, it's structured topics. Again, it's step by step, but it's a dialogue. And so they started with recording hundreds of hours of dialogue between tutors and students. And then they analysed those dialogues to identify how are they structured, what are the typical ways in which the tutor engages with the student, what are the types of engagement. And they used all of that to build this system. And so this system engages the student in a conversation. So the way they did that was they get a whole bunch of textbooks on the subject, and then they do a big statistical analysis of those textbooks. And then in the conversation, essentially, the system, the auto-tutor will ask a question, the student will respond. Then the system works out, well, how close is the student's response to an acceptable response? And it does that by looking at this data it's taken from all the textbooks. And then slowly but surely, it guides you closer and closer and closer and closer to the right answer. And this system was the first system I ever became aware of when I started to learn about education and technology, and I was amazed by it. And I'm not saying it's great, but I was amazed by it. Okay, if we move now into actual systems that are out there, this system is entirely based on the same approach as auto-tutor. But this system uses IBM Watson, right? IBM, one of the biggest companies in the world, Watson, one of the leading AI engines, and it uses a very similar approach. But what's interesting about Watson is, whereas auto-tutor, it took 30 textbooks and analysed the 30 textbooks. With this system, they're working with the education publishing company Pearson, and Pearson just gives them a book. And then IBM Watson goes through the one book, and then the whole of the dialogue is to guide somebody all the way through to reach what's said in that textbook. So it's guiding them all the time. It's based on that one textbook. So it said the tutor poses a question, the student attempts to answer, the tutor provides an evaluation of the response, gives feedback, then there's a collaborative conversation between the system and the student, the system and the student, and eventually the tutor is checking all the time whether the student understands. So the idea is that it's just based on that one textbook. Okay, so moving on to a completely different thing. Now, what I like about this one, as you might have guessed, this is from China, is that the AI in here is really basic AI. It's not complex AI at all. What's important is the logic they have applied. Now, with all the systems we've seen so far, they're based on the principle that the AI is the clever one. The system knows the correct answer, and the system will guide you to get the correct answer. The system's in charge, they're the experts. What this one is about, it's about putting the student in control. So, this works a bit like a dating app. So, many of you have probably used dating apps, I'm sure, to find the love of your life. And what this does is it connects people, the students, with tutors, with humans. So what happens is you have a class on something complicated, differential calculus. The student doesn't quite understand it in the class with their human teacher. So after the class, they get their mobile phone, they call up the app, they write differential calculus, hit the button, and up pops a list of tutors, human tutors, that the student can then engage with. And each of those human tutors has been evaluated and scored, just like a dating app, by other students. And so the student can then get, I think it's half an hour of 30 minutes of tuition. And it's just they just share the screen and the speech. So there's no video for safety reasons. But it's an extraordinary system. Now, this is in Beijing in China. Beijing in China is a huge city, and they have a lot of money. And so those tutors are all paid for by the city. And so this is a very costly approach. But nevertheless, what I like about it is it's the student who's in control, not the AI. The student decides, I want to learn this. And by using the AI to connect with somebody, that's how they move forward. Okay, my final example is this one, automated essay scoring. And when I looked into this, I was astonished about how long this has been going on. This is 20, 30 years of work. that originally had nothing to do with AI, now it has AI all the way through it. So this was a project set up by edX, but this is one of 20 projects I have come across. And the logic is that the edX using MOOCs, and so they get thousands of students, and so they've got thousands of assignments to mark. It becomes impossible to do that. So by using this, the system will automatically provide the grading. I mean, there are other systems that provide help and support so you can improve your essay, but this was about grading an essay. And there's lots of systems. There's a company, US company called Turnitin, which is really big in the UK, and there the systems are for grading, for plagiarism, all those kind of things. So, yeah, so this is another huge area of work. Okay, so I've just kind of touched the teeny weeny tiny examples. There's so many more examples out there. But what about the possibilities for the future? What can the system do? Well, first I'm going to say I'm not covering the whole possibility in what I'm about to show you, because the whole possibility changes every day. We don't know what it could be. It could change. But there are three things that I'm personally quite keen on. So firstly, this is using AI to support collaborative learning. Now, as a learning scientist, I know that collaborative learning, students working together, not individually, can be an incredibly powerful way to support learning. People typically will learn more in a collaborative setting than they will individually. However, to set up collaborative learning is incredibly difficult. To run it in a classroom is very time-consuming. It can be very challenging for individual teachers to do it. So why can't we have AI to actually do that for us? So, adaptive group formation. Now, if I needed to set you all into groups, I can sit here with a piece of paper and I can work it out, and it will take me 10 minutes, but the AI actually can do it instantly. So long as I, as the teacher, can then say, okay, but that's good, I want to change that person with that person. So I'm still in control as the teacher. Expert facilitation, so the AI observing what's going on in the collaborative learning example, and when the students are getting stuck, the system can suggest things. One of the best ones I saw this was, we have group A over here doing some work, and group B over here doing some work, and actually they were doing quite similar things. And so the AI can say to these people, look, have you looked at what these people are doing? Now, a teacher's not easily going to be able to do that kind of thing in big environments. Virtual agents. So actually, at the Open University where I work, it's a distance university. So we have 170,000 students at any one time. And the students engage, to try and get the students engaged in collaborative learning is very challenging because they are part-time. So they're not in the same place at the same time. One person's working the weekend, one person's working during the day, one person. So to get them to work together is very challenging. But what if we have virtual agents? So that an individual student could work with an AI agent and collaborate with them. That becomes possible. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different things. That's very nice. Okay, so another one that I'm really personally very keen on, and I want to get there with this. This is the kind of work I think is important because, again, it's about using the skills of computer scientists and AI to support students to do what students want to do. So, we all have our phones, we have our Siri, we have our apps, but the phone can actually be something that looks after us from an educational perspective. It could remind us when we need to do things. It could support us when we're learning things. It could make suggestions of what might be good to learn. It could connect us with other people who are learning similar things, have similar things to discuss. And a whole range of different things this permanent learning companion could do to support the individual. So for me, that's a very exciting possibility, and I definitely would like to be involved in that kind of work. But that's for the learners, but also what about the teachers? And this is the kind of thing, working with these guys, about how can we develop AI to support teachers so that teachers can do their job more effectively. So it's not the AI doing the job for the teachers, which is the case with ITS. So ITS kind of effectively replaced teachers. But this is about a tool that supports the teacher to do what the teacher wishes to do. Okay, so that's all the good stuff, right? That's all the stuff I'm very excited about and why I'm involved in this field and why I like having these conversations. But I think it's also, we have to think about the dangers to parents. So, here's an example of AI generally. This is not education, this is AI generally. Yeah? So this is like the heat map of the city. So we're using AI to help the justice system. Sounds like a good thing, yeah? We are not criminals, we don't like criminals, and if we can use AI to support getting rid of criminals, that's a good thing, right? Of course, the problem is that this is in the US, and it's the Afro-Caribbeans that are the people who are always being identified as the criminals, because the data, coming back to the data, is itself a problem. So we have to be aware of this, right? It's not all golden. It's not all great. There are issues that we must address. Now, I want to do one caveat. Please don't think I'm against any of the AI I've been talking about. I am not. I think it's fantastic and exciting. But I do think we need to be careful. So what about a second example? Face recognition. So face recognition is becoming really important. I saw an example of this only a few days ago. Notting Hill Carnival is the biggest carnival in London. Okay, compared to a Brazilian carnival, it's small. I understand that, but for the UK, it's huge. And so the point of this was to identify who are the criminals in the crowd. And so the police force in London used this system. 98% false positives. So for every 100 people it identified, 98 of them were not on the criminal record at all. So this is, we have to be aware of this. We can't just think AI is fantastic. We have to be careful. Now, the reality is, if they use the same system next year, that's going to drop, right? It's going to drop to 92%. And the following year, it's going to drop to 85%, possibly. So, as we get more data, we don't know. Okay, so there's two examples, yeah?
In your opinion, what would be a good application of facial recognition in education in Labyrinth?
We'll come on to that in a minute, if I know. But we looked at briefly two non-educational issues, and for me, this next one is for me something that really, really worries me, and about which I have no control. Okay, this really worries me. Sorry?
Facebook has been hacked these days.
Yeah, exactly.
They've stolen
60 million users.
Password, the token.
I mean, it's not just the fact that they've been hacked. Look, 100 schools. Because Mark Zuckerberg believes that their approach is a good approach for learning. Remember, Mark Zuckerberg was a university dropout. Okay? He didn't finish his university. But he understands learning. He's clever. And so the point is, Facebook, they have a lot of money. They have a lot of AI expertise. They know education. Of course they know education because they went to school, right? Or their son goes to school, or their nephew goes to school. So they're experts. So of course they can apply it. Personally, I worry greatly about this. Okay, this brings me together to this. This is the reality. Okay? And we have to use this. We have to think about it. I believe we have to think about this very carefully. Okay, so I want to ask you a question. So this is straightforward, but will you put your hand up when I ask you this question? Who's involved in developing technologies to do cool stuff? Just two of you? Okay. Who's this?
I believe it happened.
Okay. You get my point though, right? It's an important question. Yeah? We need to think about this. And just to do the cool stuff on its own, I'm not sure. Okay, what I want to look at is the ethics of AI in education in particular. Okay? So, to start with, I want to think about, break this apart and think about what does this actually mean? If we're trying to understand it at least, how can we understand it? How do we need to break this apart? So, firstly, to come back to our friend at the front here, the data. The data is really important. Yeah? Data is fundamental to AI. Without data, we have no AI. Agree? Okay. So, any thoughts?
Surveillance.
So?
Surveillance.
Okay, so data can be used for surveillance. Any other thoughts about how data?
Is it really ethical to extract information from these data? Maybe
Okay, that's a question. That's a really good question. Thank you. Privacy. Privacy, thank you. Another question. So, now, I'm not saying the answer to these questions is no. What I am saying is we must ask these questions. Okay? It's very important. So, here are some questions that I had. What data is collected? Right? So, what is the data? Is the data private data? Do we have consent to take that data? Right? When you walk down the street, I only learned this a short while ago. I walk down the street with my iPhone, and if I look for Wi-Fi, there's 12, organisations. I can click on 12 different Wi-Fi, and I thought, well, if I don't click on them, they don't know that. Because it's on my iPhone, Apple know where I am, even if I don't connect. So, have I given my consent? I'm not sure. What proxies are being used? So proxies is an incredibly important topic, right? So for example, one of the areas that you colleagues, they talk about engagement. So they're going to measure engagement. Now what they do is they look at when somebody logs on and when somebody logs off. So they measure what they can measure, which I understand. But then they give it a quick name. We'll call that engagement, just to be easy. But then 3 weeks later, they're no longer measuring when they're logged on and when they're logged off. They're now measuring engagement. So suddenly the proxy has become it. And that, I think, is a potential problem. And no such thing as raw data. No such thing as raw data. Because every decision that's made in collecting data means the data is changing. Because when we collect data, we don't collect everything because that's not possible. We make decisions. What data are we going to collect? So before we've even got the data is no longer raw. We've already made decisions. Okay, so data is a fundamental starting point of AI in education in particular. The next part is what we do with the data, right? The algorithms that you guys write. What is the computation that's going to take place there? So again, question for you.
Can the optimization of learning through AI divert learning in and of itself on the following generations that use it?
Yeah, a very valid question. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Are we fully aware of the implications of these algorithms? Do we have total control of it?
Fantastic question, yeah. Right, so, we're not saying no, we're not saying bad, Randolph, we're saying these are the questions that we need to think about. And the point is, if we, the people in education, AI in education, if we don't think about them, I promise you someone will, and their job will be to stop what's going on. So we need to think about it in advance. So these are some things that occur to me. Algorithmic biases, so not just the data, it's how the data is processed. So we can build a bias into the algorithms. What about mistakes? What do we do about mistakes? How do we know that mistakes have happened? if we're using AI in a classroom, we're saying that child is not working well and we need to do something for that child. What happens if we made a mistake? What happens if we're giving that child the wrong thing? Now, we're not going to have a nuclear explosion, right? It's not that dangerous. But for that individual child, that's really important. How do we know that we're not doing that? How do we protect ourselves against those kind of consequences? Okay, so we've looked at the big data, right? The foundations. We've looked at what we do with the data in terms of the algorithms. But remember my three-legged stool? That's not enough. So the other one is education itself. Okay, so what about education? So, okay, back to you. Any ethical questions focused on education?
The use of AI, algorithms, and data.
Sorry?
By the use of mean.
Just education. Forget AI for a minute. Just education. What ethical questions are there in education?
Are we making them to, are we teaching them to learn or to respond?
Fabulous question. So, when you set up an educational system, if it's a school or university, you make decisions about what is the point? Why are we educating these students? What are we trying to do? Well, that's a moral and ethical decision to start with. It has implications for pedagogy, the way in which we teach. Are we trying to open students to be exploring things? Or are we training a student to do a job? Right? They're two opposite extremes, and they are political, moral decisions. So here's some that I came up with. The self-fulfilling teacher one, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. When I was 16 years old and I joined the French class at school, the teacher comes into the classroom and she says, "You are the bottom group. You are all going to fail. But I've got a job to do, so let's start." Now, for me, that's not a very ethical position to take, right? But this happens all the time. If we think that child is going to do well, the chances are that child will do better than if I think that child is going to do better. Teacher expectations is very important. What else have we got there? The relationship between behaviour, discipline. You know, how important is that? So, we were in one of the schools in Marseille a few days ago and the children were shouting and screaming, they were getting excited. Is that a terrible thing? In some schools, the children would be told to stand in front of the wall. It would be terrible. Right? Again, it's a moral, pedagogical decision. Okay, so we've looked at the three separate. What about when we start bringing them together? So, we've got the ethics of data used in AI. So, we've heard words like privacy, right? We've heard other things about the data, the fact that it's not raw, the fact that we make decisions. We need to think about this. Before you build systems that take data from an educational context and do some computation, we need to think about that data and how we use them and the ethical basis for that data. We also need to think about the use of big data in education. So the field of learning analytics, there's a whole literature about ethics of learning analytics. So even if you're not doing learning analytics, you should be aware of this literature to understand, to see how it impacts upon the AI. And of course we also have the ethics of the algorithms in education, kind of thing that Ramsey was starting to mention. So all of those things, so the picture's not straightforward, the picture's complex. Well, what about that? We don't know that yet. We don't know what happens with all of these overlaps because no one's thought about it. Okay. So if you think ethics is very important for AI, would you put your hand up? So if you think it's not important, would you put your hand up? Okay. Well, this question I asked in June when these guys were in London at the International Conference on Artificial Intelligence in Education. And we put this out as a survey. Unfortunately, it wasn't answered by many people, but I thought the answer was quite interesting. So most people, N equals 42, there's not many, but most people thought it's important. I really like the honesty of this person. Okay, this person is being honest at least, right? The fact that they say, no, right, I'm not interested.
Did that person get the question right? Because maybe misunderstood by that I don't like ethics, I don't like studying or having to deal with ethics, or I don't believe it's important for it.
What you've identified is the problem of surveys. I agree with you. Yeah, it's just superficial. You know, this is not to publish, right? It's not, it's not robust in any way at all, but I thought it was interesting.
Would you know who the person is, or was it?
No, it was all
Private.
it's anonymous. Anyway,
is it ethical to make that?
It's a very good question.
Ethical implications.
Okay, so what about this then? Those of you who are involved in building systems, when do you think of the ethics? Do you think of the ethics before you start? Do you think of the ethics when you finish? Do you think of it sometime in the middle? Today I'm going to think about ethics. Or do you think about ethics the whole time?
I believe you make a good planning of what you intend to do, but some things are going to pop up. Some things are going to appear you were not aware of it.
So you do it.
I believe you need to think the entire, and some things will pop up after the project is ready. I believe. Throughout. It's really heavily another person. Join the day.
There's more than one. The thing about this is one of the things that's fascinating about surveys is I believe in asking people their opinions. I don't always believe the answers they give me. Okay? I do not believe that people think about it throughout. I do not believe that. And the reason I do not believe that is because some of the issues that get raised all the time. I think it should be throughout, okay, in my opinion. But it's when it's a self-report, how do we know? How about this? What kind of questions have I forgotten that really should be answered?
Should we really do this?
If this works.
Is it good to
Okay.
do
So these were the answers we got. There's a lot of answers there. So, what do I learn from this? It's complicated. And I think that's why we need to engage. And that complication, I think, is really, really important and interesting. Okay, so what I want to do now to conclude is just to go back to think about some use cases. So we've got all this kind of vague theory about ethics throughout, well, let's put it into practice. So you remember firstly the automatic marking by NX. Well, here's a whole bunch of objections to that approach. Some of them are practical, but they mostly have ethical consequences. So the systems are trivial. They only look at the surface features of the essay, not the depth. They're inaccurate. They discriminate. So there's a huge issue. Now whether this is true or not, I don't know. But again, these are the kind of issues that we need to be thinking about. So that's automatic marking. Well, what about emotion detection? Okay. So, emotion detection in the class, as some of you are aware, there's a huge amount of work on this. Okay? And again, please remember, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm saying we need to think of the questions. So, emotion detection is used to identify students who have some kind of challenge or some issue, And the purpose is so that we can use the AI to make them happier, make them more effective, more successful. So we're doing this because we're nice guys, right? The point of this is to be nice. So if you're at home, in your living room with your family, and you have a conversation between you and your loved one, would you like someone to be listening in? Would you like the government to be listening in?
It can be useful manipulation. You're going through a very bad situation, and this can be used to make you feel happy with this. I don't want to be happy with that, then this things are being used that way.
The question is exactly what would be the data you use it for.
Exactly.
Because we have so many things alike in the society, like what supposed to see everything, but it doesn't use their ideas.
Exactly. Which brings me back to Facebook. Now, lots of people who use Facebook happily share their entire lives on Facebook. And they do it with this logic, well, I'm talking to my friends about what I've done. No, you're not talking to your friends. You're giving data to Facebook. My daughter, she happily puts her life on Facebook, isn't it? And I'm thinking, well, okay, do you really want them to have that information about you? I think it's a question. Go back to privacy, though. You mentioned Facebook. Facebook are using this. So they have, they access your camera on your laptop. They do emotion detection on your face, and that determines what information goes into your news feeds. Is that a good thing? Where do we draw the line? Where is the good? Where is the bad? Where does that line live? We don't know. I'm not sure. It's not just Facebook. Right? It's all the others as well. Apple does it. Microsoft do it. IBM Watson doing it. They're all doing it. Emotion detection is huge. Here's one I came across the other day when I was just finishing off the presentation. This, I don't like, I'm sorry. You might like this, I don't like this. So this device, so a shop, a department store or a supermarket, they buy this device and they stick it on the shelf. And then it will detect all these different emotions of the shoppers. And then what you do is after the month, you take it off and put it in the post to the company and they do the analysis.
How is that legal?
Sorry?
That's still legal?
This is new. Yeah, I mean, this exists. They probably have a system that do it wirelessly or that, but they were doing a really simple system here, so there's no... To set it up in your shop, you just have to stick it on the shelf, that's it. And then when you finish, you take it off the shelf and put it in the post. So really simple tech, but what goes on behind it? And so this is about looking at the emotions. So then they will arrange the food on the shelves in a different place in order to deal with your emotions. So
Make it happier.
it's very challenging. Very challenging. I quite like this quote. So the creators of persuasive technology and in outdoors education, we are persuading, we are trying to guide students to go one way or another. But it should take them in the direction they'd like to take. I think it's interesting, but I have no idea how do you monitor this? How do you make sure this is happening? I think that's really quite challenging. And again, it comes back to consent. Yeah? So in that, the device in the shop, or the cameras, or the Facebook camera on your laptop, or the cameras in the classroom, where's the consent? Yeah, is it the child who gives the consent if it's a children, or should it be the parents? Or it's a huge set of issues. what this whole discussion reminded me of, I don't know if any of you are aware, have anybody come across this, the Caucasian chalk circle? Okay, Brecht was a German, and the story is, we have the child, we have the woman who has looked after the child from the beginning, and we have the blood mother. But in taking the child is being ripped apart. Yeah, so we're trying to look after each other. What do we do? So in my head, this is a metaphor. So in the middle we have the technology, whether it be the AI, whatever it is. And on the one side we have the support. This is what we as educational developers are trying to do, right? We're trying to support students so that their situation is better. But equally, we have privacy. So if our support destroys the privacy, then have we destroyed the positive aspect of the support? What is the balance? What balance do we need to get between these two elements? Okay.
I have to leave, but I would like to make a
Yeah.
I think it's, I was thinking here about the two examples he gave for us, and I think it's all about it. All of the examples we can reduce to data, but I think the issue here is much more a philosophical issue. Philosophical issue. About, you asked me this question, about education. In order for us to answer any of the questions, then draw with a conclusion about ethics. I believe that we need to, first of all, to think about what we mean by education. Because we go back, okay, all of the things that we are doing with technology is also a matter of control. It doesn't matter which kind of technology we adopt. It's a matter of control. Just to give an example, so if we think that we should somehow control, then we should leave digital technology in education. It's just in the extreme
I think
example.
Yeah, and I think like most things, control is on the spectrum. Right?
Yes.
So there's the control where you're really tightly controlling, and there's the control you're giving open.
Let's think about ITS.
Yeah.
It's a kind of control. Let's think about collaborative learning or group formation. If we recommend how to form groups, it's also kind of control.
It is, but I would argue that that's broader. It's less control than that. And I think you're right. It is, issues of control are big pedagogical, educational, political, moral questions. Yeah.
And also what we mean by truth. What is good, what is bad, what is positive, what is negative. Is positive okay?
We can, in discussing moral and ethical questions, it's always easy to think of an extreme or an extreme.
Yes.
That's easy. The question is the middle. Where do we draw the line between acceptability and unacceptability? And one of the points about that line is it depends on the culture in which we are. So where the line is drawn here is different to where the line is drawn in the UK, is different to where the line is drawn in China. Now, I just noticed I had another slide here which I didn't manage to get.
We'll back to this discussion.
No worries.
Because I have to go through my class. We're going to have lunch together, right? You.
Okay, so I was going to finish off by talking about the emotion detection with a video, which we
Artificially intelligent learning software allows students to work at their own pace while freeing up the teacher.
Okay, sorry, before we look at this, I came across I came across the video yesterday. I thought I'd put it in the presentation, obviously I didn't, so it's my fault. But I came across another video, which, so there is a school in China where today, or 6 months ago, they have cameras in the classrooms and they monitor everything the students do, from the moment they walk in the classroom to the moment they leave. And they have algorithms galore that are measuring, monitoring, and trying to work this out. Right? One of the things that they're most interested in is attention. So is the student paying attention? And they, in the reports, there's a quotation from one student who says, you know, before I could think about other things briefly and come back to it, but now I have to focus my attention at all times. This is a big ethical issue, but it's, you know, it's not right for me to tell China how to work. But if that system was brought into the UK, then it would be for me to argue. And that system has been brought into the UK. So it's a very challenging subject.
Is it really not our place to discuss with other sovereign nations how they do their teaching? Because it could lead into control of the next generation or anything.
Yeah, it could be a backdoor form of imperialism. You know, Portugal running Brazil, England running India, you know. So yeah, it could be that all over again. But clearly, again, it's easy to think of extremes, right? You know, I don't think it's right to execute somebody. I have a moral. So when I hear about other countries, I don't care where they are. I don't agree with them. So it's like, you know, where do we draw the lines again? So the takeaway from this discussion is not that AIA is bad, because it's not. It's not that AIA will always be bad, it won't. But it's about what do we need to do and think these answers through. And if anybody ever says to you, this is the correct moral approach, then I have to step away, okay? Because they really don't understand it, because it's very complicated. Okay, so this video, it's only about a minute long. And you might find it difficult, but look at the pictures. What this is based on is using an ITS, remember the step-by-steps of the student sat in front of the computer, the step-by-step approach to learning. But it's also using AR. So it's not that clear in the video, but the teacher is wearing Google glasses. Okay? And this is what you get.
To move around the classroom and work one-on-one with students who need help the most. But in practice, the teacher is often left out of the loop in these classrooms as the AI takes full control of the instruction. Although the software may be enough for many students much of the time, situations regularly arise that a human teacher is best suited to deal with. As artificial intelligence comes to the classroom, we see its role as enhancing human teachers' abilities, not replacing them. Working with K-12 math teachers, we've designed Lumilo, a pair of eyeglasses that tune teachers in to the real-time assessments that drive intelligent learning software. When a teacher glances around the room, Lumilo allows them to instantly see when students are currently struggling in the software, doing well, or when they're unlikely to master certain skills without an intervention from the teacher. In addition, Lumilo lets teachers see when students have been idle for a while, or are currently misusing the software by abusing hints or gaming the system. When a teacher gazes at a student's indicator, the system explains why this alert is showing. And when a teacher clicks on a student, a deep dive window appears, debriefing the teacher on what the student is currently working on, and the areas in which the student is struggling the most. After providing help, the teacher can set a reminder to check in again soon with this student, and can monitor whether the student improves over the next few minutes or might need another intervention from the teacher. Teachers can also monitor a summary of the whole classroom's performance to decide whether a class-level intervention, such as a mini-lecture, might be in order. Glancing around the class over the next few minutes then becomes a fast way to sense whether or not the intervention worked.
look at that video, when I saw the presentation, as someone in AIM, I look and I think, that is so cool. I thought it's empowering teachers in a very cool way. But then the next second, wow, what about the moral issues here? They're really quite challenging, the moral issues, I think.
It was the best paper of the AI.
Sorry?
The best paper of the AI.
It won the best paper, yeah, which, you know, is a very circular thing. So, these are my takeaways. Most AI research is in a moral vacuum. The question of ethics is just not really being asked by many people. Two reasons why this is important. A negative one. So the point about it is we are nice people. We want to do nice things. And so some people think, well, the ethics then will stop us doing the bad things. So that's a very negative way of thinking about the ethics. But the other way of thinking about the ethics, I think, is really important, is that if we have a really good ethical foundation and a good framework, then it will facilitate good AI and research, is my view. So, just to finish then, in my opinion, AI is entering education. It is, it's there. So it's really important that educators and then scientists, they engage. So we don't just leave it up to our technologists, but that there is a conversation, ongoing conversation. And it was interesting, we came in today, Diego, I asked Diego, is there much connection between the computer scientists and the education department at USPA? And he said no. I think that's a problem, actually. I think there should be a connection. Now I understand that there are major differences, but it's by having that conversation. And please don't think I'm criticising Bufal compared to the UK, because in the UK they're crap too, okay? There is no conversation there. Yeah? I'm not being critical of myself, I promise you. But at the same time, it's not about us just trying to reduce education and do the stuff a bit better, a bit faster, or whatever. But it's about opening up the imagination and using the possibilities, thinking this through in different ways. But this is the point I give to teachers and educators, is, you know, the technology can be very exciting. So I know lots of people are working with robots in education. And robots look pretty exciting, right? They're pretty cool in the classroom. That's fine, and it's worth exploring. But what's the educational purpose? Why are we using robots? What is the ambition? We need to think this through. So I believe in AI in education, it's not so important the AI, it's the learning. So we have to start to learn. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time. Stunned you to the silence.
When do you believe we should start? When we're talking about ethics, what should we do first, or what should we be worried about first? What do we need to do?
I don't think, I'd love to...
Like a framework, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd love to give you an answer to that question. I don't think I can. I think the start for me is the conversation. Now, I just said about the conversation with educators, but I think also conversation with philosophers. You know, we have people who are very expert in thinking about ethics, and we're not. That's not our job. So we need to have those conversations, I think, are really important. Because, you know, AI, from its history, has always been interdisciplinary, right? It's always involved computer scientists, philosophers, psychologists, anthropologists, learning. You know, it's always been in the mix. And we need to get back to that in a sense and have those conversations. And that there aren't, I think we must guard against easy answers. You know, when I asked the survey, do you think it's important? Yes, I do. Really? You know, how do you think it's important? What do you mean by that? How do you implement it? Yeah? And it's more important, I think, that we think about the questions than try and adopt a simple approach. It's thinking about the questions that I think is the most important.
That leads to another question. Won't that be paralyzing? Won't that be can that delay projects too much or make them impossible to happen maybe?
I don't think so. I think this is the bottom line. I think if we think about this in the start, then it can guide us to make our decisions. Right? In your work, you make decisions all the time, and a lot of the decisions are made because of technical reasons. Right? Other decisions are made because of practical reasons. And all I'm suggesting is that when you're thinking those things through, bring in the ethics as well. I'm not saying you don't, but that's the point I'm making. And actually, I think it will make it more possible, because you don't want to be known as the person who developed unethical AI, right? That's not what you're looking to do. You're a nice person. You want to be thought of, and so that's what we have to do. We have to think that through at the beginning, I think, to make sure that every decision we make has that ethical underpinning. And we'll make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
We will make mistakes.
Well, if we think only about, we won't decide if we get too much concerned or worried about not making mistakes. It's because I really care. And sometimes we think we're doing something good, and data or the feedback shows that you're not. And that's what I very care about.
Right, so think about that scenario. Had you been able to think through the ethical consequences earlier, with a conversation with other experts, for example, then that mistake might not have happened so bad. So that's what I mean by facilitating. It saves you time, because you don't want to do a year's project and then realise, oh my God, this is ethically bad, right? You're much better off making those ethical conversations at the beginning, and so instead of going that way, you go this way. You know? But I don't have the answer, Reynolds. For me, the answer is we need to have the conversation. And that's as far as we can be at the moment. Because one of the things we need to recognise is that ethics philosophers of ethics have been arguing about ethics for 500 years or more, and they still don't have fixed answers. So we can't expect him to be right to the end of the day. We need to hear.
I'm just curious how in the UK you do research.
Sorry?
So how you consider ethical questions, ethical issues in research in the UK? Because in Brazil you have a committee, ethical committee, you have to apply.
Yeah. So
just
we have to say,
that.
but that's a process that's been built up over many years, and it focuses on the ethics of the research methodology, yes, and who we're doing it to and all those kind of things. But the point is that AI has opened new questions.
No, but just the procedure of...
Yeah,
like
but my point is that procedure will not address the questions that AI raises.
Okay.
AI raises new questions that are not covered by that. So yeah, we have to do the university ethics committee because that's what we have to do, right? But that's not enough, because they're not experts in AI. You know, we could go to them with a project about face recognition in the classroom, and they will be asking some very quite important questions. But if they don't really understand the AI and the consequences, they might not be asking the questions we need them to ask. I would also admit, right, getting the permission from the university, the ethics commission, is a pain in the arse, right? It's something we have to do, and it's very much a tick box. We've got to get that done so we can get on with our research. It's annoying, and that's part of the problem.
How would we even start trying to regulate AI if it's such a powerful economical tool? Because one could use something like ITS to make a certain school have better grades, and so the other schools would want to, and not caring to ask the questions if they should be using that system because it makes students see with I don't remember the name, narrow vision, narrow field of vision. So how would we try to regulate that?
But I mean, regulation itself is another level. It's even more complicated. So, but if we don't get the moral questions worked out first, we can't then legislate. But there are a whole host of reasons. So have you heard in the EU, European Union, about GDPR? GDPR, which is General Data Protection Regulations. Yeah. So it's huge. So one of the things they say in there is that when you take data and you make a conclusion, it could be in, do we give you money to buy a car? It could be what school you go to. All different things. But one of the things it must be, according to GDPR, is transparent. Now we know that a lot of AI algorithms are not transparent. Neural networks, we know they're not by definition. So companies have to be really careful about how they fit with the GDPR regulations. But the GDPR regulations, a lot of people complain, well, you're destroying what we're doing. We can't do it anymore, so we can't make advances. Yeah, it's a huge challenge. Thank you very much for your patience and for listening to my English. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mm.